It allows us to provide actionable intelligence to our customers very quickly.
It helps us escalate things quicker. It helps us ultimately drive better outcomes across the board.
The first mantra should be, my job is to enable the business.
Welcome to our podcast on empowering hyperlocal resilience. I'm Krista Ancre, I'm Vice President of Marketing with Everbridge, and I'm joined today by Tracy Reinhold, Everbridge's Chief Security Officer, and James Neufeld, the CEO and founder of Samdesk. So Samdesk and Everbridge have partnered to provide proactive intelligence-enabled alerting. Tracy and James are going to discuss today a few important areas. Responding to micro disruptions before they become critical events, the combination of AI-filtered alerts with human analysis, and extending beyond alerts, combining the best risk intelligence with the best response tools to proactively empower resilience. Before we get started, I'm just going to ask each of them to answer one question, which is about what the partnership between Everbridge and Samdesk means to them. Tracy, we'll start with you.
All right. Thanks, Krista. Thanks. So here's my thoughts on that. When I think about the combination, what really resonates with me is the ability to actually aggregate curated intelligence. That is what that does for us through this partnership with Samdesk. Is it allows us to provide actionable intelligence to our customers very quickly, and the level of confidence that we have in that intelligence is accelerated by this partnership. You know, intelligence and data are two different things. So data is great, but data that doesn't matter is just noise. What we love about this partnership is that it provides us with intelligence that's actually meaningful for our customers. And we know that we can trust the veracity of the intelligence when we get it. So to me, as an old intelligence guy, that's why I think this partnership is really, really great, both for Samdesk and for Everbridge, but mostly for our customers.
Excellent. James, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Krista, and thanks, Tracy. We're really excited to be partnering with Everbridge. Everbridge is the clear standard within the industry, right? And as an up and coming startup, we're really excited about the joint capabilities. And the thing that we hear consistently from our users is that they have their standard operating procedures baked into Everbridge. They have processes, tools. They have their entire workflows mapped out in the variety of tools that Everbridge offers and is the standard. And the partnership, kind of building on what you're saying, Tracy, right? It helps supercharge that, right? It helps us escalate things quicker. It helps us ultimately drive better outcomes across the board. We can think about it in terms of, triggering, more effective, faster mass communications with the joint capabilities of Everbridge and Samdesk, right? Getting to intelligence quicker, sorting that signal to noise faster will drive better outcomes across, mass comm, supply chain issues, micro disruptions, which I know we're kind of going to get into a little bit today. So we're excited. We share that opinion. I think we've got a lot of shared customers today, and really excited to have even more customers come on board of the joint capabilities that our two teams offer. So yeah, we're really excited about bringing that hyperlocal AI-powered speediness to the robust platform that Everbridge offers.
Fantastic. Okay, I'm going to turn it to you both for a nice discussion here. Over to you.
Thanks, Krista. Tracy, let's start there. Let's think about that a little bit more in terms of the importance, and it's one of those perhaps obvious things, right? But how important is speed in the role of corporate security and resilience? It's an obvious one. Obviously, I think everybody says that speed is better, but let's unpack that a little bit more from your perspective. And how important is speedy intelligence and data, as you kind of referred to earlier, to the overall corporate security structure and process?
So James, I think it's two things actually. It's speed and accuracy. So speed is great, but you get speed with social media. Unfortunately, you don't actually get the veracity that you need to make informed decisions. So there's a sweet spot in there where you can act too quickly with not enough information, which is actually somewhat catastrophic when you make uninformed decisions. So what I say is that speed is important, but speed with validated intelligence or verified intelligence is what really matters. So the faster you can get really good intelligence, the faster you can make decisions. So, you know, as we've talked in the past, it's not always that catastrophic
Right.
event. But you still need the facts and you need to be able to trust the information that you get. If you don't trust the intelligence, you won't actually make quick decisions because you're going to be paralyzed by that fear that what if I can't trust this intel and I make the wrong decision? So that's where credibility or a confidence level associated with intelligence is important. Depending on the confidence level, can accelerate your ability to make a decision that impacts the business.
Yeah, it's that concept, right? I mean, we talked earlier about the preparation, the classic kind of crisis life cycle of preparation, response, recovery, and the variations of that, right? And the not having credible information, nobody wants to halt operations. Nobody wants to unnecessarily wave the red flag, being like, shut it down. We have to do that, right? Because if it's wrong, you're impacting revenue, you're impacting, you're not becoming a business enabler. You're inhibiting the business from doing that, right? And I think that really speaks to the decision that you need to make during a crisis, right? Especially in those early phases, how accurate is this information? And I guess that's kind of what you're describing, right? I mean, that's the difference between data and intelligence.
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing is, the quicker you can get that. So ultimately, the goal is, and I think you hit on it. The job of corporate security is to enable the business. So I know that sounds incredibly simple, but it has been an absolute mind shift in the corporate security world, from the old guards, gates, and guns to how do I add value to my business. And one of the ways that you do that is to actually try to get ahead of potential disruptions before they actually manifest. And that's where credible intelligence really pays huge dividends. It's not enough just to monitor 50,000 disparate sources if there's no way to curate that and get it down to a manageable bite that you can look at and make that informed decision. Now, you can have great intelligence, you can make good decisions, but bad things happen all the time. So the goal here is to mitigate before manifestation if possible. Right. But we're all, we all live in the real world. We know that just doesn't happen very much. But if you think about it from enabling the business perspective, part of that is leveraging that intelligence feed. And then actually, and I hate to say this, but sort of internally marketing the advantage of that so that the core business understands the value that intelligence brings to the mitigation of business disruptions. It sounds like everybody should know this, but people get myopically focused on their area of the business and sort of put on those blinders and say, this is not my responsibility. Somebody else is going to do this, or I don't understand that. That's where we end up having significant challenges in addressing potential business disruptions when people don't understand the critical value of intelligence.
How do you manage a crisis you're not aware of? Right.
Right. Exactly.
And so that is the lifeblood of it. I love the, focusing a little bit, on the, business enablement part, because I have that conversation a lot of time with our customers as well. And we see both sides of it. We see, really keen, eager, very highly skilled professionals that want to push their organization forward. They know the value they add. They sometimes struggle to translate that into, the C-suite or the organizational, I'm not seen as a business enabler, even though, we all know that. And one of the things that sticks out to me when I have these conversations, Tracy, and would love your thoughts on it, is it's this notion of, it is, typically the things, maybe 5-10 years ago, the things that were happening inside my four walls, it's the guards and guns and cameras, right? That's my job function, right? And so nobody really starts a company per se to build a corporate security team. As you scale, it becomes a necessity, by and large, right? And so now we are going through that shift that you're talking about. It's continually the issues outside our four walls that are potentially the biggest disruptors to our safety continuity, big or small, right? And so talk to me about, what does that shift mean for the skill set and the team? I mean, those job functions are really changing from looking at, security feeds, and it's critical, it's important, we need that. But it's now needing more of that. And we need to be, like you said, market it. We need to be the first one to brief our executive team of saying, hey, we are aware of this issue. We are on it, so that they're not seeing it on the 6 o'clock news for the first time, calling in angry to the GSOC saying, what are you guys doing? Right. So what does that mean for, the skill shift and the demand shift? It's enormous, it seems like.
So it is enormous. So let me break that down a little bit. So corporate security traditionally has always been walled off from the business. And it's not just a mental thing, it's also a physical thing. If you think about corporate security organizations, they're always behind a locked door. So they generally become the department of no. No, you can't do that. No, you can't have this. No, this is too dangerous, etc. So in order to transition that process, the first thing that corporate security folks have to do is to be able to speak in terms that resonates with the business. So stop thinking about corporate security as a standalone entity, but actually how it helps us either generate revenue, return to revenue, reduce risk that impacts revenue. All of those things manifest differently. It could be something as simple as a potential physical risk to an employee that reduces their ability to produce because they're worried about other things. It could be a network outage that adversely impacts the ability of the company to move forward. When you talk about the change in skill sets, I think one of the things that we all have to remember is that every organization in the world is a tech company. Whether we like to admit that or not, technology is embedded in everything that we do. If you think back, I'm old. So when I think back to when I started with the FBI, we didn't have cell phones, right? So was the world safer then? Or did we just not know about the threats as quickly? So one of the ways that you can articulate that to your core business is talk about the impact of a business disruption and how it affects either top line or bottom line for the company. That's really important, and that will actually resonate in the C-suite and in the board. Don't talk security. Use your own experiences and your ability to interface with the company to actually accelerate the acceptance of security as a business enabler as opposed to a cost center for the organization. If you just look at it straight out, people will say, well, yeah, but you don't actually generate revenue. So what you have to be able to do is to articulate how what your team does actually accelerates the growth of the company or their ability to return to revenue faster, because that's really what we do in security. There was a time when everything was, as you said, inside the four walls, right? You could have a PSIM solution that aggregated all of your camera feeds, your visitor access, and all that stuff. The problem is, if your threat is outside, what are you doing to actually become aware of it? And how are you mitigating that over something that you have little to no control of? And that's where the utilization of intelligence is super important. And I know we're going to talk about AI and humans, and I think you need both. And I think that they both serve very unique functions today. I think we've just barely scratched the surface on AI when it comes to intelligence. And we have to be thoughtful in the way that we leverage that to make sure that we don't make bad decisions on partially completed AI frameworks.
Right. And so that's the challenge, right? I mean, now, like you're telling the story about, the FBI not having cell phones. So did it feel safer, or was it actually, or we were not even aware? And that is a challenge, right? And so now I think we see business leaders in the C-suite all watching the 6 o'clock news, and all we're hearing is the perma crisis, as if we can call it that, right, around us, right? And so it creates, I think, sometimes this anxiety within leaderships and business teams that are, am I impacted? And so it forces the shift change that we're talking about within the corporate security function or the business resilience or trust and safety teams, as some of them are now calling it. It's going through, a lot of iterations as we see it. And so that's the second problem, right? And I think that's what you're hitting on, is like now we're overwhelmed. So we were going from like we were, perhaps some amount of bliss in the ignorance before to, overwhelmed with things, and now we're like, are any of these actually problems for me? Am I impacted? How do I go about that, right? And that's where I think the marriage of the human and the AI is really important, right? Because we've seen some companies hire hundreds and hundreds, or even public sector with thousands of analysts trying to distill this information. That's where we see AI being a huge help, because it's great at pattern recognition. It's great at certain parts of from data to intelligence, if we think of that process, right? And that's definitely one of the most exciting things I think about the Everbridge partnership, right? Is it really helps address that, and that's where I think a lot of companies are facing today, right? They're overwhelmed with too much noise. They're overwhelmed with too much information, and some of the solutions in the market don't really address that. I think to the degree, if I can say this, that the Samdesk and Everbridge partnership can, because we can turn to social media, we can turn to hundreds of thousands of data sources, we can turn on the news and say, wow, look at all these different problems. But eventually, the organization will turn a blind eye to it and say, no, none of these affect me. I don't want to hear about it. I don't want to know about it, right? So walk us through your thought process, or how you would encourage companies going from signal to noise, because I think that's really crucial. And I think that's really, honestly, one of the biggest things at the heart of the Samdesk and Everbridge partnership.
Yeah, so a couple of thoughts on that. Number one is you have to know what you care about, right? And it goes back to what you said earlier. You can be overwhelmed with data. You can be overwhelmed with intelligence if it's not relevant to you. So you talked about the public sector hiring thousands of human analysts. And, when I ran the intelligence program for the FBI, I had 3,500 analysts, which was great. But here's the problem, and I don't mean to disparage human analysts, because they're wonderful and we need them, but the speed with which they can call through intelligence is limited by the human brain. So if I think this is the way I look at it, I look at kind of like when you look at a sales funnel and a marketing approach, right? The top of the funnel is huge. There's thousands of leads that come in there. By the time it gets down to actionable leads, it's very small. Intelligence is the same way. You can aggregate 30,000 disparate sources. The problem is you need to be able to do two things. You have to say, okay, so from a geographic perspective, where am I concerned? Number one. And from a threat perspective, and I don't like to use threat, it harkens back to my old days, but from a disruption perspective, what is it that I'm worried about? So when you start to put those types of parameters into the algorithm itself, it actually allows you to curate that data faster. So it's about distilling that noise to intel ratio, right? You want to get rid of all of that noise, because if you don't, you will stop listening. You will stop paying attention because it is too overwhelming. So one of the things I like about our partnership is, so Everbridge gives a company the ability to geolocate what matters to them. And then when you overlay threat information or intelligence that could potentially disrupt that business, then it becomes very relevant, and it actually necks down what you want. And what we find is that a lot of people, when they first get the access to intelligence, they want everything, right? I need it all. I need all terrorism activity in the world. And about a day and a half, they'll call you back and they'll say, "Oh my God, I can't function this way." So understanding the parameters that are of concern to you allows you to better tailor your intelligence aggregation and deconfliction. If you don't do that, if you don't know what's important to you, then everything is important. It's kind of like the old days of business continuity, where everybody had a business continuity plan because everybody was important. The reality is everybody, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but it's not. What are the core capabilities of your business? The same principle should apply when you think about aggregation and deconfliction of intelligence. Focus it on what's important to you, make that decision before you decide to bring in 1,000 different feeds, because you will be overwhelmed, as you indicated earlier. So there's a little bit of thought process that goes into that. And then AI, machining, whatever you want to call it, is actually how you accelerate that process so that you get the meat of what you need faster so you can make those decisions. The other thing that intelligence or AI can do is actually increase the veracity of the information by compiling different sources and comparing like stories so that you get some degree that says, you know what, this actually is happening. This is not just a social media. We're also getting it on one of our government channels. We're getting it from mainstream media. We're starting to see a pattern here. We need to start paying attention to this. That can happen very quickly with AI, faster than it can with a human trying to sift through all of that. So to me, it's about leveraging your really capable analysts, probably more in a QC function, and then using AI to do the heavy legwork associated with intelligence aggregation and deconfliction. Does that make
It
sense?
completely makes sense, right? I mean, humans are really good at deep cognitive understanding the really nuanced components. What humans really struggle with, I can't read two pages at once. I can't be reading a tweet and a government website simultaneously. So there are inherent limitations to just the inputs and outputs of the human brain and what we're able to do that machines don't have, right? So an AI system like at Samdesk, we can read hundreds of thousands of articles at the same time. Right. So even if the cognizant level of the AI is not what the human is, and the human has a superior intelligence, some of the inputs and outputs create an environment where you can spot the pattern recognition, and a human could as well. You would just have to put thousands upon thousands of humans to get the
Right.
same net effect, right? And so we view it as a real enabler to the analyst as well, right? We view ourselves as really doing that, bringing it up the field as far as we possibly can to pass it off to somebody that we think will understand what you were talking about before, the business, requirements. They're going to know what the business, strategic objectives are. You're going to understand what the go-to-market strategy is. You're going to understand a lot of those different things and the nuances of, how do I interpret this issue? And that's where I think again, the power of AI really comes in to really set up, human intelligence or the human analysts or human operators on the other side to focus on what they are, inherently better at, in our view, right? And so I wanted to touch, on something a little bit there too, in terms of thinking about hyper local as it relates to our conversation of intelligence and AI and data. And so what strikes me, sometimes in my conversations, Tracy, and I would love your thoughts on your own, conversations within, leaders in the space. We turn on the 6 o'clock news, we see the big event, we see Ukraine, we see the pandemic, and obviously those are, major events that will, of course, have, a lot of impact. But that's like a shared reality, right? Like that will have an impact for a lot of us. We live in a very interconnected society. So, when COVID hits, that's a shared, crisis that we need to monitor. And so that's, I want to, acknowledge that. But then there's this other part where I think it's very difficult for these micro disruptions, and something that we talk about at Samdesk is, the death by 1,000 cuts that we see happening to companies because we're all monitoring for the big things, right? Or even leadership's only aware of the big things because their teams are not informing them on the micro disruptions that in of themselves might not be, they're not going to take down, 30% of the workforce, but they could take out a data center. They could take out a crucial supply chain, and that will have a knock-on effect, right? And so how aware do you think that organizations are? Are a lot of corporate security teams focus on the big tentpole events, and that's what they are really worried about? How aware are you thinking? Do you think that corporate security teams are of the hazmat incident or the water main break or the flood that could happen to their data center, the micro disruptions? Are those blind spots?
So they can be. It it's not a straightforward, simple answer. Let me just break that down a little bit. Part of it is how engaged is the team with the business, right? Understanding those critical capabilities of an organization and looking for potential disruptions. That's a different mindset than monitoring a parking lot or making sure you have access control. It's more about resilience at that point, but you can't separate the two. I'll give you one of the classic examples is if everybody has gone to just-in-time delivery because warehousing product is expensive and nobody wants to do that, which makes sense. I think that was driven home in the early days of the pandemic when we had the massive shortages. But think about if you are a company that is responsible for delivering garments to a major retail company, and you source all of those through a specific factory in pick a country, pick a city in China, and that city actually gets a flood or gets a fire disruption, and that factory is impacted. You need to know that so that you can shift your sourcing capabilities quickly. Threat monitoring is not just about, as you said, the catastrophic events. It's about those micro disruptions that will actually impact the sustainability of the business. It's not always about a threat. Sometimes that threat manifests as a simple business disruption, but what it does is it takes away some of your competitiveness with your customers. They will shift to somebody that can actually fulfill their needs while you were not prepared. So if you have two companies, and I don't mean this to be an advertisement for Everbridge, but if you've got one that is using our visual command center and using Samdesk Intel into that, you're getting you can filter what you get from that. So all of a sudden, if you're thinking about supply chain disruptions, if you remember before the pandemic, the only thing everybody talked about was supply chain security. Now it's about supply chain resilience, which said another way is disruptions to your supply chain that adversely impacts your ability to sustain your market advantage. So when you think about that, those micro disruptions that we talk about are really important. And it could be something as simple as a tube strike in London or a train strike in France that adversely affects your ability to deliver to your customers. Not a catastrophic event, not a global thing. It's not going to make the world news. But where intelligence really pays for itself is when you filter down what's important to you. And that goes back to what I talked about earlier. You have to know what matters. So security teams that are tuned into the business and understand the potential disruptions to that business are the ones that are actually leveraging that intelligence feed to inform the business so that they can make decisions that would lessen the impact of a hyperlocal event, such as a fire at a factory in a country you've probably never been to, nor do you intend to go to, but you source 80% of your raw materials from there. So that's where I think you talked about the shift in corporate security. That's part of that shift when you think about that. And you can no longer say that's not my job or that's not my responsibility, because your first mantra should be, my job is to enable the business. Everything else is how I do it. And intelligence makes that so much faster. And that goes back to what you said earlier about speed, right? So having a validated intelligence source that you trust. So companies are not going to be able to pull in 15,000 disparate sources and then try to figure that out themselves. They'll use an Everbridge and a Samdesk to do that for them. Because remember, their job is what their core business is. It's not security and it's not intelligence. And that's where we collectively become that business enabler for organizations. The other thing about intelligence, and I say this a lot, is that it has to be risk and threat agnostic. We have to collect everything, and then they will provide the requirements, which will allow the AI to neck down what they need and see what they need to see and not what they don't want to see.
And I love it, not to have like a semantical discussion, but I think it's important, right? And I think that you were using, the challenge that we often say is threat intelligence, right? And it puts a certain connotation on the corporate security function, and that is an important part of the function, and we need that. Oftentimes, it's not that threatening. Right, it's not a threat of nature, and not necessarily a bad actor necessarily, right? And so it creates sometimes what we see is these organizational blind spots because of how they view data sources and data partners, right? It could be a game day. Mm-hmm. It could be a very positive thing. It could actually be a lot of data that could be aggregated around things like that. So we have many gig economy, companies as customers, and those are disruptions to them. Everything is bit, right? We don't want necessarily autonomous vehicles yet in their current state to be driving towards a big stadium filled with rowdy fans, right? Not a threat, not a problem. We want to keep it that way, right? But it's the disruption is actually a very positive thing, right? So it's understanding what are these disruptive sources And, your examples of France and things like that, those are the things that we continually see, where we see a lot of organizations, they have a certain thought process of what threat intelligence is, and they could be caught off guard that actually their supply chain is disrupted about something that they were not monitoring. There was no easy way to really monitor what was happening in the ground. And we've seen, geopolitical events in Myanmar, or, geopolitical events in, certain African nations that are supplying raw minerals for our current modern day supply chain, right? And they seem so distantly unconnected to what is important to my business, right? And I think that's the challenge. And the best organizations are starting to understand the interconnectedness of the world, that a small hyper-local event in some part of, this part of the world could mean, 3 months down the line, a huge ramification for me missing my Q1 earnings because I was unable to supply that, right? And that's where we see, and that's what I'm so excited, Tracy, about, the best and the brightest that are using Everbridge and Samdesk combinations. Those are the organizations in our view, and we'll do the shameless plug here because we can, right? But that's the best teams in the industry, right? Because they are proactive. They are the ones sending this upstream to the C-suite, being, hey, here's the briefing, here's the thing. I don't want to give you necessarily the rundown of the big news event that we all heard about. Here I found something that I'm really worried about, right? And those are the teams that are getting funded. They're not being seen as a cost center. They're not getting, every budget cycle. And it's because they are the very early indicators to that organization, using technology and tools to assist them. But that's often one thing that I observe, Tracy, is just, it's that simple act sometimes, right? They are on top of it. They send it up the chain, and they're not waiting for the top command coming down and saying, hey, why didn't we know about this? Because then we're all getting, funding cuts. We're just a cost center. We're not a business enabler. Yep. We kind of continue that cycle, right? But I don't think it's possible, Tracy. I think, you need the Samdesk Everbridge combination, right? When you're trying to monitor the entire world for the unknowns, it becomes humanly very difficult. And we don't have thousands of people at organizations like we do in the public sector to that degree, right? So that's what we're so excited about. I think from the Samdesk and Everbridge components is being able to bring the best of both companies together. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that proactive stance, and less surprises, less getting caught off guard, and more, being that enabler that gets us excited. I think at Samdesk, Tracy, is, being one of those tech companies that really helps them achieve what you're talking about, right? We were actually seen as a business enabler because of the actions I was able to take within Everbridge and Samdesk, et cetera. That's what got my team excited. That's what got my, organization out of hot water before it even happened. That's really exciting. And I think we can really do that with this partnership.
So I think so too. And the other thing that is important to understand is that, so in government, for example, we have what we call national collection requirements, the things that matter to the government. It's no different in the private sector. So part of what we do is these customer advisory boards, where we bring in our customers to say, really, what matters to you? Because what that does is that helps us, Everbridge and Samdesk, actually understand how the intelligence that we're gathering and deconflicting is actually going to be used by our customers. Our customers should always be the ones that design those collection requirements, because they know what's important to them. And that's where the critical nature of the corporate security team and the evolution of that team is so important. You cannot rely on yesterday to be successful tomorrow. So part of that is constantly learning, constantly changing, adopting the utilization of technology, accelerating your ability to mitigate risks and disruptions for a company. And I love the way that you talked about threat intelligence has a certain stigma attached to it. And it's because it's what we have known for generations. There's a certain understanding that goes with that, whether it's with a U.S. intelligence agency, whether it's with one of the Five Eyes, they all talk about it the same way. We have to start to introduce the idea of disruption as opposed to threat, because regardless of how it manifests, it disrupts your business, which adversely impacts your organization's ability to remain competitive. So, and I think it's important that we do both public and private sector companies. So for some of them, it is threat, and I get that. But even for a small municipality, a water main break is not a threat, but it's a huge impediment to the citizens that they're counting on. So early notification of that is really important. So being able to understand the disruption and then communicate it to either your employees or your residents is huge. The faster you know, the faster they know, the less disgruntled or unpleased they are with the administration that is managing either the company or the city. So I think it's a great opportunity. I'm excited about the partnership. I think that it's going to be fascinating to see what AI does and how quickly it progresses. And I think that it will radically change the way that organizations manage intelligence and thereby manage disruptions that are informed by actionable intelligence.
Well, thanks so much, Tracy. Really appreciate the conversation today. I think we could probably go on for a couple more days easily. So we'll call it a wrap there. And I know both of our teams are really looking forward to spending time with customers, talking through how our solution kind of, can work together to make their lives a lot easier. So thanks so much for your time, Tracy, and appreciate the conversation.
Great. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.